I think I heard after all of the signings and after all the moves were made, people were starting to talk about, could this team possibly be a Super Bowl contender? And I'm like, whoa, pump the brakes here. Like, we got to see this team in training camp, and we got to see the quarterback. Let's just slow it down a little bit here. Let's try to enjoy the ride here and see if they can be a contender in the division. Look, I like a lot of the moves they've made. I think a lot of things look good on paper, but as we know in the NFL, if you want to be one of those final four teams, one of those final six teams in the NFL, you have to have tremendous quarterback play.
Welcome back to another episode of Birds 365. I'm joined by the legendary John McMullen, and we also have a very, very, very special guest. I know, John Clark, you probably were expecting Jody Mack in the building with John McMullen, but unfortunately we're experiencing some technical difficulties, and I, the producer, will try to hold it down until Jody Mack gets back on board. But John, how are you feeling?
Doing great today. How you guys doing?
Good to see you, John. John Clark, obviously, NBC Sports Philadelphia, NBC 10, Anchor 6 and 10. Also listen to Take Off with John Clark. Tremendous podcast. John, Eagles about to start training camp. I know one of your takeoffs recently, you talked with Miles Sanders about goals and expectations. That's the thing with me with this team is the expectations. They are ramped up, my friend. Do you get that sense with not only the Eagles but the fan base around Philadelphia?
Absolutely. Good morning, John. Good morning, Tone. Good to see you guys again. I do think that the expectations keep going up, and it's one of those things where I think I heard after all of the signings and after all the moves were made, people were starting to talk about, could this team possibly be a Super Bowl contender? And I'm like, whoa, pump the brakes here. Like, we got to see this team in training camp, and we got to see the quarterback. Let's just slow it down a little bit here. Let's try to enjoy the ride here and see if they can be a contender in the division. Look, I like a lot of the moves they've made. I think a lot of things look good on paper, but as we know in the NFL, if you want to be one of those final four teams, one of those final six teams in the NFL, you have to have tremendous quarterback play. And that, to me, is the question mark. We're going to see if Jalen Hurts can take that next step, because that's what you need. And you can have all the young talent on offense, but you got to stay healthy, and the quarterback has to take that leap.
Yeah, and, John, with the quarterback, and I hate to boil everything down, but you're right. I mean, when you start talking about the NFL and getting to the level where the Eagles want to get, eventually you're going to have to go through, look what happened last year. Tom Brady, it might be Aaron Rodgers, it might be Matthew Stafford. Eventually, you're going to have to match up with that superstar quarterback. And Jody Mack is back as well. So we have John Clark. We got Jody Mack. So let me just finish off that thought, John. You're going to have to match up with that superstar quarterback. So when I look at this roster, I get pretty excited about 2 through 53. But that number one, both literally and figuratively with Jalen Hurts, because he wears number one, that's what it's all about for this team, isn't it? I mean,
absolutely. And we saw positive steps last year, but they really had the most run-heavy offense in the NFL. And then when it got to the playoffs and you faced a winning team for the first time, I believe the number is they were 0-7.
Yeah.
At the end of the year, teams that wound up having a winning record. Now, the Saints, they faced them when they had a winning record, but they had a lot of injuries, a lot of players missing with COVID and stuff like that. So I need to see them beat a winning team. 0-7 against teams that wound up with a winning record. Then you face the Bucs, and they didn't belong on the field with the Bucs. And you saw what that defense and mixing up looks and things like that did to Jalen Hurts. So Jalen has put in all of the time. He has worked out most of the offseason. He got together with A.J. Brown. He got together with Devontae Smith and A.J. recently in South Jersey. He's putting in all of the work, but we need to see that next step. And look, I think there have been reasons why he hasn't taken that next step, because he hasn't had the same play caller 2 years in a row since high school. But we need to see that. And I think with the offense, the way it's set up now, with all the talent that they have, when you have A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, all these pieces, you're going to see it open up a little bit more. You're going to have somebody open. Somebody's going to have man coverage on every play, and it's up to Jalen to throw receivers open, to be accurate with that football, the anticipation throws, and get that ball to the receiver or the tight end that has that man coverage.
Johnny Clark, thank you very much for filling in for me with my technical issues ass. You did an outstanding job and are much better looking. So thank you very much for that. Here's where I want to go next with you. You talked plenty about the passing game and the added weapons and Jalen Hurts and his attitude. Last year, they're the number one run team in the National Football League. And a lot of that was on Jalen Hurts' legs, making plays for himself, some designated runs, some, all right, can't get the ball out, too much pressure, nobody open, take off and turn 25 yards up the field, which was very successful for the Eagles. The running game this year, Miles Sanders, final year of a contract, certainly a motivated individual. A couple of weeks ago said they have an all-star type team. How are they going to get the most out of Miles Sanders? Who is that on this year? Is it on the play calling? Is it on the head coach, Miles himself? I know it's a combination of all of them, but who is the individual that will see to it that the Eagles get the most out of Miles Sanders that they can this year?
Well, that's Nick Sirianni. And look, last year they're 2-5. And they say, okay, we cannot throw the ball as much as we're throwing it. We cannot put it all on Jalen Hurts' shoulders. We need to use what is the best part of our offense, and that's the offensive line, and let's run behind them. So they completely changed their offense. And look, we all know in this league you have to have a passing offense. Jeff Lurie, Howie Roseman, Nick Sirianni. Nick was hired to throw the ball. His concepts as a play caller, being a receiver and a receivers coach. So we know they want to throw the ball more. They now have A.J. Brown added into the mix. They're going to want to do what they set out to do last year and throw the ball, because that is ultimately how you get to the Super Bowl. So when you look at it that way, I don't think Miles Sanders is going to get a ton more carries. I think they're going to manage his workload, because I think Miles is that type of guy where if you give him the 20, 23 carries a game, he may get nicked up a little bit. So I think that they want to manage those carries. And look, I do think that you're going to see them add another back. Jordan Howard is still out there.
Yeah.
And
break that glass, John Clark. Break it.
Look, they run the ball pretty good with Jordan Howard. I think he averaged 4.7 yards a carry last year behind arguably the best offensive line in football. You need that guy who can get you that tough yard or two. And I think they're going to add somebody, whether it's Jordan Howard or not. But I think they're going to manage Miles Sanders again, because you don't want him getting up near 20 carries because of the durability. And I think you want to have him for the stretch run. So I think they're going to manage his carries. I would like to see him catch the ball a little bit more. I know he had some drops, but he believes that he can catch the ball. He's worked hard on it. So I don't think you're going to see an explosion of like, hey, it's all going to go to Miles Sanders. I think they're going to manage him once again, and they're going to throw the ball.
I agree, John. Now, but here's the thing. Nick likes a running back by committee. You know that. He admits that on the record. They want to get Kenny Gainwell involved with the third downs and the hurry-up offense. He's a great natural pass catcher. You recently spoke, as I said to Miles, on your Takeoff with John Clark podcast. Does he realize that? Does he understand that probably the volume is not going to be there for him to get that 1,300-yard season? It's going to be more of a situational type setup.
Well, yeah, that is a big, huge question, because I think Miles sees some of these other younger players that the Eagles have having been locked up. with contract extensions, and that's normally what the Eagles do. But I think there must be a general disagreement on the value of Miles Sanders and what he should get as far as a new contract.
Yeah.
And you said it. This NFL, you saw the Patriots win all those years with different running backs every year, and running backs can lose it quickly. They can get hurt. And since it's a passing league, a lot of teams think they can draft that running back in the 4th or 5th round and insert him. And we see with Boston Scott, he goes in, especially against the Giants, and does well. So I think that's going to be one of the most fascinating things to see what happens with Miles Sanders and his contract situation after the season. And I think that is in the back of his mind, because when I had him on my podcast, I asked him about how you can become the best, because he said he wants to be the best. And he said specifically, I need to be more consistent and I need more opportunities. He did say that. He said, I'm going to be honest, I need more opportunities. So he obviously wants to run the ball more. And I also believe he wants to catch the ball more. He definitely wants to catch the ball more. He wants more opportunities, but I don't think in this offense you're necessarily going to have that for him, because I do think they have the same style running back with Gainwell and Miles Sanders. They don't have that big back yet. I do think they'll sign him, but I think they have that same style running back, and I do think Nick wants to get the ball into Kenny's hands, especially in the passing game. So that is going to be one of the most fascinating questions with the Eagles this year, is what happens with Miles Sanders. Does he get a contract extension? Does he get one that he believes is fair to him? Because I don't think they're just going to add a whole bunch of carries and workload to him.
All right, Johnny Clark, this question's for you, but JM, if you also want to give an answer, please do so, because you guys are going to get your first chance to talk to some of the Eagle players, quote unquote, in season when camp opens up next week. Are either one of you guys going to go down the Madden road? Because the Eagles' couple of positions, numbers have leaked out, and they aren't exactly flattering for the Eagles. A.J. Brown, not a top 10 wide receiver. Dallas Goedert, no better than the 8th best tight end. Hassan Reddick, nowhere to be found in the top 10 edge pass rushers. I know it's just a silly video game, and I'm not a gamer, so it doesn't bother me much. But both of you guys know they take this stuff seriously.
Hassan was on Twitter. He was upset about his Madden rating. I'm not asking because I don't give a flying. But John, you might
Johnny
ask
Clark,
him.
you'll do it, right? You'll get him feeling on the Madden rating or lack thereof, right?
Hey, Jody, thanks for being a good producer. That's a good storyline. I like it because like these guys,
they take it serious.
We saw Slay and how upset they get, and they really care about that rating. It means a lot to them, because this is the video game generation. But I think A.J. Brown, that's a little ridiculous, because let's consider the quarterback that he had as well. So it's not like he had a top 6 quarterback. A.J. Brown, I think, is going to have a big year. And I think it's huge that Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown have worked out a lot in the offseason. They talk about being best friends, BFFs. Yeah. And I think that means a lot, because the quarterback-receiver relationship is absolutely huge. And it's also big. Devontae played with Jalen Hurts in college, and they're friendly. So I think these guys take it as an affront if they do have a bad rating or disagree with the rating. Have they officially come out, or how do these leak? Does the Madden company send some of these out to get the buzz going?
They've leaked a couple of positions: tight end, wide receiver, and
edge rusher.
Rushers.
They generally do it every day.
Tomorrow. Yeah. But the Eagles have been, I think, underranked and or underappreciated in all 3 of the positions so far. So, you might get a couple of guys with chips on their shoulder when you get there, Johnny Clark.
Yeah. I agree with you. That is a great storyline. By the way, I mean, Dallas Goedert, he spent half the year, Zach Ertz was still with the Eagles. So I think you give him a full year with that athleticism. He's got the speed and the size, and he's going to have some open matchups over the middle with the receivers out there. I definitely think next year, I guarantee next year that his rating will be better, because I think he's a top 7 tight end in the NFL. Do you guys agree?
I got him top 5. I
Top
got him
five.
that high. Yeah.
I would say
I
top
think he's
five,
one
yeah.
of the best tight ends in football. I think it's Kittle, Andrews, Kelsey, and then you can argue from
Waller.
that point.
We got to go out to
Darren's
Vegas.
good. But here's the thing about Dallas Goedert. Same thing with Travis Kelsey. Look, Travis is, one of the great pass catching tight ends of all time. But Dallas Goedert and Kittle and Andrews, it's really an endangered species, John. They're old school tight ends. They can block. You can talk about Kyle Pitts, a Philly kid. He's really a glorified receiver. Same thing with Darren Waller. I remember when Darren Waller, you might remember this, John, when the Ravens, he was a 6th-round pick of the Ravens, and he came in that year as a rookie. They were doing joint practices at NovaCare, and he ate the Eagles alive as a 6'6" receiver, and they ultimately shifted him to tight end. Dallas is one of the best blockers in this league, and he's a great receiver. But that leads me down my next road, John. You're mentioning AJ, Devontae. There's only one football. It's a nice problem to have, and it's a problem the Eagles haven't had in recent years. But now they have all these weapons that they all want the football. Does that become a concern at some point?
I do think that these guys are team guys. We saw it with Dallas Goedert, with Zach Ertz still being there. Zach went through it with Brent Selleck. And I do think these guys are team guys. And I think the relationship that Jalen Hurts has with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, I think that is a big thing because, everybody wants the football. Receivers want the football. Miles Sanders wants the football. Dallas Goedert wants the football. But, look, I think they're all young. They're all young. They're growing together. It's not like you have a TO coming in, a veteran, or somebody who has had 80, 90, 95 catches, whatever it is, year after year. They're all young. They're all 23, 24 as far as receivers go. So I think that won't be a problem. And I think, it's the old Andy Reid style where you're going to spread that ball around. And that's the way to do it. Some games, A.J. Brown may get 100 yards. Another game, it might be Dallas Goedert's game. But I think because they're so young and they don't have that guy that has been there for 8 years, 9 years, whatever it is, I don't think that's going to be an issue.
JC, I've been told by a couple of different people that your backhand is well above average. So I need to know, are you planning on spending any quality time on the tennis courts of Haddonfield just in case a football team, the Redskin, the Commanders fan decides to get out there on the court next to Coach Sirianni? We need you there to give us the actual skinny on what is said if Coach Sirianni has an issue with a out-of-town fan playing tennis here in town.
Well, that was such a great story because I think it shows the fire of Nick Sirianni. I mean, he gets fired up and he is hyped and he is all in here in Philadelphia. So I think he was busting some chops, giving the guy, a little bit of grief. But I don't think that he got over the top and upset and was yelling at the guy. He busts some chops. He likes to mix it up a little bit. And I love this story. I think it's fantastic. And I will go undercover as a tennis player. and I will try to get to the bottom of this and maybe even try to bring in some undercover Cowboys fans and have them on the court next to Nick and see if Nick kind of sprays a couple balls their way. But I love it. Didn't you guys love that the coach cares that much and is all in on Philly?
Yeah, we already knew that, John. But, I mean, I think people don't realize how Nick can get fired up. He's very likable. He's very nice, but he gets really fired up. He was really upset. What was it, the Vegas game, I think, where somebody threw a jersey at him after he was really upset by that. Then you had the Blower incident. He gets fired up, and that's a part of his personality that people don't get to see that often. And I think it's good because he's very engaging, but he's also tough when he needs to be tough. And that's a difficult job, head coach in the NFL. So year 2 for Nick Sirianni, I think we saw a lot of growth, but I want to center on one particular thing with you, John, and that's the play calling. Because Nick has now admitted he's giving up the play calling. I personally like that. I like CEO coaches. I don't want a glorified offensive coordinator as my head coach. I want a guy who's going to be involved with the whole team. What's your take on CEO coaches? What's your take on a young coach being comfortable enough to give up play calling halfway through his first season?
Look, I think that says a lot about Nick. And I think if you go back to the first year, as I said, I mean, he was hired specifically for his acumen with being a play caller, working with quarterbacks, working with receivers, and him being a receiver. It's a passing league. And yet he kind of did that self-scouting with some help of his coaches and everybody else and said, you know what? It's not working throwing the ball. We need to run the ball. And they dialed it back and said, you know what? Okay, we're going to run the ball. We're going to be a running team. And look, that takes away a little bit of the creativity of an offensive play caller with all of the different passing concepts. So I think he separates his ego in these decisions. And I think it's great because he must have seen that Shane Steichen was doing a good job or that his play calls are good. Of course, he wouldn't have a play caller whose play calls don't work. So I think him setting his ego aside and saying, you know what, I think it's going to work best this way. I think that's great because we all know when he came in as head coach of the Eagles, he says, I'm going to call the plays. And that is, I remember Andy Reid, that is their favorite part of the job is calling the plays. So to give that up, I think he's obviously doing it for the betterment of the offense and the betterment of the team. So I think each step of the way we have seen Nick, I think he's put his ego aside. I think it also shows up with these off-season programs and listening to his veterans. He's basically listening to what his veterans are saying about lessening the workload. I know a lot of people are saying, hey, they have too many days off, too many walkthroughs, resting the veterans too much. But he is putting aside the work that he wants to get in and came to an agreement with his veterans to have more walkthroughs and kind of mental reps. So I think each step of the way we've seen Nick let go of stuff. And I'll tell you one guy who didn't do that. That's Chip Kelly. And the ego got in the way of Chip Kelly. We're not seeing that with Nick Sirianni.
John, need your take on this. We discussed it earlier. We had Ricky Ricardo. No, you're well aware of Rick, the voice of the Eagles, en Espanol. And we separated on how we look at this a little bit. So I want to get your stance. Eagles schedule this year. Open up at Detroit, one of the worst teams in the NFL last year. Minnesota, non-playoff team. Washington, well behind the Eagles in the division. Jacksonville, number 1 pick of the draft again this year. That's a pretty easy way to start the schedule. 2 home games, 2 road games, but no killer team at the start of the Eagles schedule. If you had been given the 17 games and they said, Johnny Clark, put them in whatever order you want to give the Eagles the best chance to have the best record at the end of the season, good thing or bad thing that the Eagles schedule, at least on paper, starts early? Would you rather start easy and watch it get a little tougher as you go? Would you want to start tougher and say, hey, let's get easy on the back end? How would you have constructed the Eagles schedule if it was up to you? Is it a good thing or a bad thing that they've got winnable games to start the year?
Great thing. And I'll tell you what, in today's NFL, when you watch September football, it's almost like preseason football.
Yeah.
Because they don't get enough reps in the preseason. September is preseason football. So I think to have a soft schedule to start off, I think that's fantastic. And the only problem I have with the schedule is I was so looking forward to going to Chicago in September. Beautiful Chicago in September, not later in the year where it gets cold and windy, and it is frigid in Chicago in the winter.
Christmas Eve, you're not going to – whoa, they play December 18th? You're not looking forward to being in Chicago on December 18th?
That's tough.
And neither is Jake Elliott with the wins there for kicking. But I'll tell you one other good thing is that most of the road games, if I'm if I'm correct about this, most of the road games in cold places around the road are in domes.
Yeah.
Now, Detroit doesn't matter. That was in September. But Indianapolis, I believe that's kind of, October-ish?
No, November 20th. You're right. It might be chilly by then, sneaking up on Thanksgiving.
Yeah, so that's a dome there. And then Arizona, doesn't matter, but that's a dome. So, look, I think you've got I think Chicago might be your toughest cold weather city. Of course, you've got Washington and Philadelphia, but MetLife Stadium. But I think the road schedule is very favorable, and you have some of the good teams coming here instead of going on the road. So I think it's a very favorable schedule for the Eagles. And I do think it's great they start off with a softer schedule, because I'll tell you, the first couple of weeks of NFL football, sometimes it's tough to watch because these guys are just getting going.
Yeah, it is sometimes tough to watch. Follow the great John Clark at J Clark NBCS, Johnny Airport, NBC 10, 6 and 11 sports anchor. Also the Takeoff podcast with John Clark, the latest Kyle Schwarber of the Phillies on his historic June production. So get that wherever your podcasts are. Now I'm getting to the important stuff, John. The important stuff for me. And that's, you might not remember this, but I remember this. Before the pandemic, I remember we were talking about the wrestling flyer, and you had found them in your garage or something. You found your old wrestling flyers, and you were going to bring them to me. And then the pandemic hit. I want my Terry Von Erich interview. Do you still have those things?
I do remember that conversation. I believe it was in the press box, and we were talking some good old wrestling. And I do have some of my old newsletters that I was writing, and they are in the garage. I did find them. I'll dust them off. I will and I really appreciate you actually remembering that and having an interest.
Oh, yeah.
Because I totally remember. Look, I believe I was in high school when I was doing this, but I was interviewing Terry Von Erich, and all of a sudden the line went dead. We're on regular phones, no cell phones.
Yeah.
The line goes dead, and I'm like, well, what happened? Oh my goodness. So I press stop on the record, and then I call him back, and then he finally answers like 10 minutes later. He's like, hey man, I'm sorry. I dropped my phone in the toilet.
Oh.
So, those are kind of the old school wrestling things, but I remember that conversation. And I really enjoyed doing those shoot interviews with those wrestlers because there was that certain time where they were willing to talk about anything and everything, whereas before they weren't. So I appreciate that. I will bring them to camp.
I appreciate it, John. I'm looking forward to it.
One shoot interview I'd like to do would be Dr. Britt Baker, but we don't necessarily need to go there right now. If it's not a wrestling spot you're going to be doing for the Takeoff podcast, we got a bunch of new personalities coming in with the Philadelphia Eagles this year. Some are going to have huge contributions or be asked to make those huge contributions. Other guys going to be allowed to develop and the like, but their personality is what their personality is. I don't know if you've already put the request in, but I'm sure you're thinking along those lines. Who's the newest Eagle that John Clark will be working hard to get on his Takeoff podcast?
Oh, man. A.J. Brown. I mean, you saw his Twitter game already. A.J. Brown is going to be a fun guy to cover. So A.J. Brown, number one.
All right.
We'll be waiting with bated breath. JC, we appreciate you coming on board. We'll punch you up in season. Enjoy your grass time with McMullen. Thanks for jumping in to the stream with us today.
Hey, you got it, guys. Keep up the good work.